Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome once again to Bucks County's webinar on successful strategies for women. This is actually a two-part series. We had the last one a few weeks back, and this one will be by the same presenter, and it will be focusing on envisioning your business beyond today. So before we begin, I would like to just say a few words. First of all, my name is Linda Zangrilli. I'm the chapter chair for Bucks County. For those of you who need some information, we can tell you the session's being recorded. You will receive a copy of the recording as well as the slides after the presentation. And some have requested it ahead of time, and we did send out some of the slides ahead of time. So that is covered. So you don't need to take copious notes because you'll have everything that you need. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We will address all questions at the end of the webinar. And if you could just do us one favor and not use the chat to advertise your business as a courtesy to others, we would appreciate it. So what do we know about SCORE? I'm sure that I see many familiar names here, so I'm sure that there's people that have heard this many times, but I'm going to run through it anyway. SCORE is a national nonprofit organization. We have some 350 chapters, between 10 and 13,000 volunteers all over the United States who do what we do here in Bucks County. We have, in Bucks County, we cover the entire county, as well as Eastern Montgomery. And we also have some 70 volunteers, everyone volunteers their time, who come from everywhere. They come from all walks of life. They have all kinds of discipline, business disciplines. They have experience. Some have started businesses. Some have come out of corporate America. So if you need it, we have it in our chapter. If not, we can get it in our larger SCORE organization. SCORE has one simple mission, and that is to help start, grow, and foster small business. So we are a resource partner of the Small Business Administration. We have many, many resources at our disposal, and we achieve our mission through weekly webinars like this, where we educate the public on various business topics, as well as we offer free mentoring services. So if you're a small business that maybe needs a little bit of help, either you're not sure what to do to get started, or you are started and you need a little bit of a push, please reach out to us. Everything is free, as I mentioned. Our website, and I believe that's in the chat, is buckscounty.score.org. And when you go there, you'll see a button that says, I need a mentor. You click that and we will take it from there. You'll get a mentor assigned to you who will contact you and begin your journey with SCORE. And we will be available to you as few times or as many times as you need us. We don't abandon you after one or two sessions. We'll continue to work with you for as long as you need us to become successful. And if anyone is out there who would like to become a member and maybe help us with our mission, that same website is available to you, buckscounty.score.org, and say, I would like to be a member. And then we will take it from there. We'll contact you, talk to you about our mission, what we do, how we do this. I see somebody saying she's tried for some time to get a mentor, but no mentor yet. If that can't be from Bucks County, because we're all over it. But I will make sure that you do get some attention. I know that we have 3 people who do the assigning now, so it is we don't let the requests sit. So if you've asked us for a mentor, you will get a mentor, I promise. Okay, once again, you don't need to take notes. You're going to get a copy of the presentation. You're going to get a copy of the recording. keep your questions to the end. And
Here we go.
let's get started. So here is Ed Torello, who is our seminar chair. He's done an excellent job for us bringing these seminars to you. He tries to get different things and not just the basic business topics, but all topics. And he has been very successful in putting these programs together. So Ed, take it from here.
Thank you very much, Linda, and thank you all for joining us. I think you're going to find this presentation very, very interesting. As luck would have it, we have again Nicole McCabe, who gave our first presentation on the successful strategies for the Women's Series. And Nicole, as you know, is an Alliance Director of Microsoft Partnership at Snowflake and is responsible for the overall strategic relationship between Snowflake and Microsoft. She worked also as a VP and Managing Director at Microsoft Partnership at SAP. At SAP, she was also the Global Head of Gender Equality. And I think you're going to find this a very, very interesting presentation. I'm just going to turn it right over to Nicole so that we can begin. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ed. And super excited to be here again. As mentioned, this is the second series or session, I should say, in our two-part series. The first one was Envisioning Your Business Beyond Today, which took place on June 7th. And there's a link to that recording in this presentation as well. And today we're going to be focusing on strength-based leadership. A little bit about me. I know some of you may have heard this if you attended the first session, but I'm also conscious that not everyone was there. So just a little bit about me. The top of the screen, you'll see influencer/advisor. We'll dive a little bit deeper into what that is. But those are basically my two strengths from an assessment that I felt really changed my career. And so we'll dive into that for sure. I'm a girl mom, dog mom, wife, and overly just happy and passionate about helping others succeed and ultimately be happy. 25 years of work experience. Most of that was in the tech industry. I have worked in pharma as well as consulting, but most of my time has been spent in the tech industry in a variety of roles. And you'll see that when I go over my career little maze, I like to call it. But I am a generalist who overall has a knack for seeing the whole picture, right? And driving strategy to execution. And why did I put this in here? Because today we're going to be talking about strengths. And it's not enough to just understand your own strengths. I really encourage people to then own it. That's your story as you get more awareness about yourself. And so my story, and I struggled with it for a long time. I wasn't a subject matter in marketing or finance or law. But I was this generalist that had this ability to see the whole picture and connect not only what we were creating the strategy around, but how it would actually be executed. I am a professional and personal coach. This is something that I started to really get awareness of when I was a gender equality head at SAP. I found a lot of women coming to me wanting to maybe talk about their situation, wanting to talk about their career and seek help. And from there, I went on to become sort of this professional and personal coach. I went through the Erickson solution-based coaching. So I am all about, helping clients find their solution. And lastly, I am also a SCORE mentee. So cannot speak enough about this program and the value that it brings. I was fortunate enough to get a mentee a couple of years ago. And Krishna has been great. And we've kept connected ever since. So just, coming at it from the SCORE mentee, was super excited when they asked me if I would be willing to do these sessions. Little bit about my career maze, as I like to call it. I think sometimes when we refer to things as a career path, we expect the next stone or the next, opportunity to be very clear, and it isn't always clear. So mine is much more of a maze. But I started, out of college, I went to Frito-Lay. And I would say that the first few organizations that I joined, Frito-Lay, Grant Thornton, PDI, even SAP, were really because I was curious, right? There was something about the role that attracted me. Oftentimes it was, what can I learn? Maybe it was, will I be traveling? Those were things that were of interest to me earlier on in my career. But when I got to SAP, it's really where I started to identify my strengths and see how I can leverage my strengths within my career. So when you look at all the roles I had, I entered in account management, I was in marketing, I went over to HR and diversity and inclusion, and then I went to partner management. And I always tell people on paper, it doesn't make sense. Like it's not even a conventional career path to go from, support to marketing to HR to business development. But I was really able to do it because during this time, somebody introduced me to certain assessments that helped me really identify my strengths. And we'll talk about, what exactly a strength is outside of just what you're good at. But for me, I embraced my strengths, right? And from there, I looked at roles that could leverage my strengths because that's when I knew I would be most successful. And I turned down roles that would leverage maybe more of my weaknesses or not fully leverage my strengths. So this is really where I would say this whole concept of strength-based leadership came into play for me. And then, as mentioned in the introduction, I recently left SAP after 17 years and joined Snowflake. So Snowflake is a data company, and I've joined them as the partner manager for Microsoft. What we're going to talk about today is a couple of things. First and foremost, I'm going to recap envisioning your business beyond today. Don't worry, I'm not going to go over the entire presentation, but there are some key elements that I feel like set the foundation for the conversation that we're going to have today, right? So I'm going to sort of touch on that briefly. Then we're going to talk about what strengths are. I think oftentimes there's a misconception. We tend to always think it's what we're good at. If we're good at project management, we think it's project management, but we might not even enjoy project management. So would that be a strength? We'll talk about that. How to find your strength. We'll spend a significant amount of time here. I think this is the greatest thing that everyone can do for yourselves is to spend the time to find out what your strengths are. Talk lastly about how to integrate those strengths into your leadership. And then we'll also touch on some additional resources, as we always do, so that you can continue learning and implementing beyond today. So in our first session, one of the concepts that we brought up was around blind spots and how to identify them. And, there's two definitions here. I really like the second one, which is that one thing that you don't see that becomes a constraint for growth. So what are those blind spots? It might be what you think you know. It might be questions that you have. The company's logos that you see up here are ones that are known as having had blind spots, right? Blockbuster never envisioned the streaming capabilities. So as a result, it went from basically being one of the only places you could go to get videos to now, no longer in existence. BlackBerry was the same thing. Barnes and Noble, right? When Amazon introduced the Kindle, when Amazon launched online bookstores, they were taken off guard, right? That's a blind spot, not being able to see sort of where the future is going. And some of these companies are no longer in existence, but some of them, had blind spots, but were able to pivot quickly and then grow their businesses accordingly to the new market demand. So I just call that out because, you might have seen some of these logos might look familiar. Sears, right? I mean, Sears was always the department store to go to. They were known for their tools and things like that. The Limited is one where I don't know, probably dating myself, but I certainly shopped there when I was a little bit younger. And now it's very difficult. If you can find the Limited at all, it's very difficult. And they've shifted more to online. So these are examples of just how the blind spots can begin to impact organizations. They can make it or they can break it. So how do you understand these blind spots, right? So first and foremost, to look at the blind spot, you can ask yourself a couple questions, right? What experience do you have? So, if you're building out a legal component as an example to your business plan, do you really have experience in that? Or are you trying to gather knowledge in bits and pieces? That could be a blind spot. What are your weaknesses? What are your strengths? If you don't know them, you probably have blind spots. It's just the way it is, right? Because, and we'll go into this in a little bit, the more you know about your strengths, the more you can identify your blind spots. Also, where do you procrastinate? These are things that people tend to procrastinate when they don't immediately know the answer or how to do something. So I always encourage clients to look at, why are you procrastinating? What questions do you have? Or do you just can you do it, but you don't feel like doing it? Those are things that can lead into blind spots. Also, do you have too little, too much self-confidence? There's always this balance, right? I think confidence also, you can have so much that you think you know the answers to everything, which has a lot of blind spots, or you have too little that maybe you don't have as many blind spots as you thought, right? So finding this balance and self-confidence, I think is huge. And again, understanding your strengths is a way to build that. And then the last question I always like people to ask is, do you have a fear of failure? What specifically are you fearing when it comes to failure, right? Is it the perception? Is it your brand? Is it the risk or the impact on your life? Those are also can lead to being able to identify quickly some of the blind spots. Some ways to address blind spots. I encourage people in our last session to be open and ask for feedback, right? Ask for feedback from people that know you. If you've had one interaction with somebody, I probably wouldn't ask them for feedback, but ask feedback from friends, ask feedback from family. If you've worked with people on projects, ask them for feedback. What do you think my strengths are? What do you think are areas where I can develop? And those develop areas, again, will be probably where your blind spots are sitting. But when you ask for that feedback, obviously be open to it. I know we've always heard feedback is a gift. I truly believe that, but I think that we have to be open to receiving it. And it's okay to filter that feedback. You might hear feedback that's an outlier to what others said. It could just be the way that person is perceiving you in that particular moment. And that's okay, right? You don't have to take 100% of the feedback, but you should be open to it, thank the person, and then filter it and identify what your blind spots are. We talked about the last session. We also talked about sort of the blind spots and the impact on planning. So I encourage folks to look at your strategic plan. Look at it from a timeline. We had a great timeline graph up in that last session, but look at it from ideation to execution, right? What are the steps within that strategic plan that are inherently known to you? Maybe you have a marketing background. You might know how to market the heck out of your new business, but maybe you don't have a sales background. So you have a lot of questions around sales, right? That's probably what's not known. That's your blind spot. Partner with a mentor or coach. Again, I think this was such a valuable experience for me. Having somebody that wasn't in deep with my business idea and plan, somebody that could come from the outside and ask questions, someone that could bring experience that I didn't necessarily have in either marketing or law or sales, right? I think that mentor or coach from SCORE was certainly extremely valuable in being able to help me identify my own blind spots. And I had several what I call the aha moments where I'm like, okay, I don't know as much as I thought I knew in that area. And then the last one we talked about is sort of taking time for assessments and self-reflections. And this is very hard sometimes, right? I think we always have 100 different things going on, especially if you're trying to get maybe a business off the ground, maybe you have another job or a family to balance. It's very difficult to just stop and take those assessments. But more importantly, once those assessments are completed, self-reflect, right? Are they accurate? Think about it. How can you implement those into your lives? And this is what we're going to be talking about more today. Okay. So when it comes to strengths, because this is the foundation of knowing your blind spots as well, but how are we defining strengths? First and foremost, I love the definition of strengths are couple things. One, what you're good at, but two, what you enjoy. I will say that oftentimes as individuals, and this is what I learned at SAP as well, we take for granted our strengths, and those are sort of the first category. So we all have these, I call them inherent strengths, which are just baked into the way we are and we were born, right? It's how our brain works. It's how we absorb and analyze information. It's the emotional component of it. Are we super emotional? Are we able to disconnect? What's that emotional balance like? The influence / communication style. These are things that are inherent to each of us. And when we talk today, we're going to dive really deep into the inherent strengths, because a lot of the assessments call out these strengths, right? So I think it's so important that we recognize what unique ability we have that we can always bring to the table. The second category of strengths are what I like to call acquired strengths, right? These are things where it could be knowledge that you have, right? Maybe it's from education. Maybe you've gone on to college. Maybe you've gone to technical school or have an MBA or a law degree or a doctor. So these acquired strengths, knowledge is a key one, right? Also the experience that we've had. If you look at my career maze, I have a tremendous amount of experience in a variety of functional areas. So I am able to come to the table and look at a specific problem or a specific strategy and understand those integration points with, account management or marketing and the people component of a strategy, right? From my time in HR. So those things, when you look back over experience, it could be situations like myself. It could be maybe you spend a lot of time in pharma. Maybe you spend a lot of time in manufacturing or supply chain or retail. So these experiences that you have will always be strengths, right? You're constantly building strengths. Every interaction that you have as well, I always say you're acquiring strengths. If I look back to think about a first-time manager, right? I think first-time managers, they can look at this too and say, oh yeah, those interactions, every interaction I had, and maybe from the time I started managing 10 years ago to when I'm managing now, I've honed my skills, right? You come across more personalities, you come across different ways to motivate people. So those interactions become a learning opportunity for managers. And then through those learning opportunities, they've developed and acquired additional strengths. And then the last category of acquired strengths that I like to call out is training. And we hear this a lot, right? Most of us have had development plans where we say these are areas where I'd like to develop. It can be anything from, presentation style to communication skills to managing people. But those are things where it's a specific skill that you can continue to develop through acquired training, right? So when you look at this graph, I want you to take away the fact that there's two aspects, inherent and acquired. And acquired strengths are those that, again, you can always build through external resources. The inherent ones, and we're going to spend a lot of time on that today, are those that you are naturally born with and your natural inclinations. Okay. So how the heck do you identify these inherent strengths? That's always the question I get. And there's a ton of different assessments out there. I know there's Myers-Briggs, there's others. The three that I particularly like are the CliftonStrengths 34 assessment, the StandOut assessment, which this is the one that really I had the opportunity to take at SAP. It changed the way I looked at my strengths. It changed the way I selected roles to take. And it also gave me a tremendous amount of confidence because I embraced those strengths, right? And that's what I was good at, and I knew it. And so this is one that I really liked. And then one I also recently took through my coaching seminar was one called Saboteurs Assessment. And this is Dr. Shirzad Shamain. he has the premise that your mind is your best friend, but it can also be your worst enemy, right? I mean, we always have this voice in our head. So we'll talk a little bit about the Saboteurs Assessment because it's a different spin on your strengths, but it's complementary as well. And just for reference, I do have links in this for those that have the slides. I know the slides will also be going out, but as you dive deeper into this or want to take these assessments on your own, the links are also provided here for you. Okay, so let's talk about the CliftonStrengths assessment first. The way that the CliftonStrengths assessment looks at individuals, so it has 34 different, they call them strength themes, if you will, and then those are broken into 4 domains. So the 4 domains, like you see here, your ability for strategic thinking, your ability to execute, how you influence, and then the 4th one is all around relationship building. So how do you build your relationships, right? What triggers do you use or what themes do you use? So those are the 4 that are broken down in the CliftonStrengths. And to give you an example, hope this is good, when you take a report, and this is just a sample report, when you take the assessment, the report will be much more robust. But in summary, it's going to give you this style of paper, right? This page layout where your strengths are very dominant, right? 1 through 10. But it's going to look at, within those categories, what are your top 5 themes? And then there's a whole other section, which is more on the navigating. So of those 34, here's your top 10 strengths. And here are other ones that maybe you go in and out of, but they're not necessarily going to be your strengths, right? From there, you would click on, each of these top 10 or top 5 and dive deeper in. And apologies, hopefully you can all see this. I know it's a little bit small, but the significance. So if the top theme that you had, strength, was around significance, you can see very clearly at the top that it's linked to influencing. So your ability to influence is your top strength. It'll talk about, the uniqueness of you. So why that becomes important. Again, going back to filtering and down to what's most important to you, like what you were born with. It will also connect you to, why you succeed using this. And a lot of times when you look at why you succeed using this, when we take a moment to reflect and identify areas where we have been successful, oftentimes what I found is people will read that and say, oh, wow, this is spot on, but I never thought about it. Right. And which is a key statement, because when you don't think about something, oftentimes it's your strength, right? It's something that we take as for granted because we just assume that everyone can influence like this, as an example. But the reality is they can't. And so this becomes a piece of the finding your strengths puzzle, I like to say. Then it will also go over, and this is again for your top 5 strengths, it'll give you some things that you can do to take action, right? So how can you maximize your potential and your leadership leveraging this particular strength? So I love that it gives you an action plan. I'm somebody that loves to read something, but unless it gives me a so what can I do now? Or so what does this mean? I often struggle with that. So I love anything that gives you a take action, right? And this does that. And then if you look at the bottom area, and I love this, right? Watch out for blind spots. And we just talked about blind spots, but it will do this for every strength that is identified for you, right? So it will tell you exactly where your potential blind spots can be if this is your strength. So this is the one around the Clifton. The next one that we're going to talk about is the StandOut assessment. And so as I mentioned in my bio at the beginning, I had these 2 next to my name. right? So I had the advisor and I had the influencer. And when you do the standout assessment, it marries them together. And I think my overarching statement is that people move quickly under my direction, right? And when I took the standout assessment, I was surprised. And when I talked to colleagues who took the standout assessment, they were surprised initially at what came back. But when you're able to really read through the assessment report, digest what they're telling you about yourself, I went back and was like, oh, you know what? This is actually spot on. Every job I had that I really enjoyed, or every project that I enjoyed, leveraged these two strengths. I also, it will list these in rank order. So I was able to see which two were my weakest strengths. And when I read through those, I was like, okay, that makes sense to me. Every job or project that I had where I had to leverage or tap into these strengths, or weaknesses, I should say, I did not enjoy it. Right. So I really started to embrace this concept that I'm an advisor and an influencer. In my mind, I really wanted to be a pioneer. I don't know why. It just probably sounded fun. And I wanted to be a creator. But the reality is, I'm an influencer and I'm an advisor. And that comes in handy. And that also ties back to my ability to, again, look at strategy, to execution, and be able to build critical elements into a plan to ensure that it's successful. So again, this is the standout. It's by a gentleman, Marcus Buckingham. I do have the information on the slide prior in terms of where you can find it. This is a free assessment that you can all take with COVID. It used to cost, I don't recall what the fee was exactly, but when COVID hit, they actually made this free for a limited time. So it's still free. I've gone out, I took it again just to have some fun, but definitely would encourage everyone, if you have not ever taken an assessment like this, to take this one, especially since it doesn't cost anything. And then the last assessment that we're going to go over is around the saboteurs, right? And with the saboteurs, this is a pretty interesting one. So there's going to be 9 saboteurs that we'll look at today. But the saboteur assessment is really based on what are the voices in your head that, again, it could be your best friend or it could be your worst enemy. So when I took, go back up here, one of these. So when I took this, I thought, great, I'm an advisor, I'm influencer, this will be fantastic. And then I took the Saboteurs Assessment, and I came up the first time as a hyper rational. And with the Saboteurs Assessment, you can tend to go within the top 3 saboteurs, but you would never, for example, it's 1 to 9, you would never all of a sudden become a 9, right? Whatever your 9 was defined as, and we'll go into this. But these are the ones that they've identified. So the first one, and as you read through these, I'd be curious, are there any that you read and say, oh, that's me, right? So avoider, this is the person who always tries to stay positive and pleasant, make sure everyone's happy. They don't like conflict at all. And they don't like having to do, unpleasant tasks. And it doesn't mean a task that, we just don't enjoy. It tends to be, they don't like to have difficult discussions with colleagues. They don't like to be the person that has to push back. The controller tends to be the person that can't let go, right? They operate from a place more of anxiety and impatience, and they do like to take charge. So even though you hire the right team around you, if you do have this controller saboteur tendency, you just need to be conscious of that and understand that, when you can let go and when you actually need to take control. The hyperachiever, everything for the hyperachiever is based on performance, right? What's that last achievement that you did? Did you complete the project faster than somebody? Did you, get the new job? It's a constant moving goalpost, as I like to say. So the hyperachiever That's one of the saboteurs that some of us might fall victim to. I am a hyper rational. That was at least the first time around. It came up as my most dominant. My top three are, and I'll share them with you in a little bit. My top three are a little bit close, but I'm hyper rational, right? I tend to look at things very practically, right? Which sometimes can be perceived, and it says it here, as uncaring or unfeeling, and that's not really the case. Hyper rational people tend to say, "Oh my gosh, this is awful." You're right. All right, what are we going to do to fix it? And we immediately shift to how do you execute, right? How do you get the job done? And then there's also the hyper vigilance. So this is somebody that is anxious. Sometimes they also always are looking at what is going to go wrong, what are the dangers, what are the risks of this project as well. The next four to complete our 9 is the pleaser, right? I'm sure we've all known pleasers. They want to make everyone happy. They tend to lose sight of their own needs or even their own thoughts, right? They don't want to volunteer their thoughts sometimes if it's going to rock the boat, because ultimately they feel satisfaction from pleasing others. There's restless. This is somebody that's always busy, somebody that's always looking for greater excitement, more activity. They tend not to be content with the current activity that they're doing, or they'll be content for a limited time. The stickler is a perfectionist. Really, they love to have order. They love rules. They love boundaries. It's very difficult to get them to be flexible and think outside the box sometimes. And then the last one is the victim, right? And this is somebody who it tends to be emotional. They internalize all the feelings, right? So everything it goes wrong. It's of course this would go wrong for me, right? So these are the 9 different saboteurs or judges. And these saboteurs are developed not only based on like just how our brains developed, before we were born, but also they develop within like the first 11 years of life. So they become the way in which we cope for survival, right? And what we tend to fall back on. So I call that out because these are things that you can pay attention to, but you can also shift. Now, here's mine. I took this one last night. I came up with restless. I guess I'm probably feeling a little bit more restless now that I have a new job in the past 2 months. But, the top 3 at any given point could shift a little bit. But as I was saying before, I would never come up or take this assessment at any time and probably shift from the victim being my top saboteur. So those sorts of things would not happen. But again, the top 3, depending on when you take this, I took it a year ago now, and my top one was a hyper rational, right? I was in a role that I really knew. So I think that's probably why the hyper rational came into play. But the restless one and the hyperachiever, were always in my top 3. Take a breath there for a second. Encourage everyone, again, if you have questions about these, just put them in the Q&A. I will say that from a saboteurs, how it differs from the strengths is that it's your internal enemy, right? It's your automatic habits that you revert back to when in certain situations, right? It's sort of how you judge things based on the beliefs that you have acquired or the beliefs that you have over your lifetime and assumptions that we make at work. So saboteurs, really interesting just to know what they are, because it does complement, it does just complement the strengths from other assessments. So when we look at this, again, going on to sample assessment, because I think it's great when we have these things, I pulled out the hyper rational for this one, because that's what I was previously. It was my top one, and it's one I can really relate to. But aside from the characteristics and sort of the thoughts that would go to through your mind, it does talk about the impact on self and others. So I think that this is a really big key piece to have when you're looking at your strengths, right? What is the impact that you can have on others with your strengths? We looked at the blind spots in the first one. How can that be assessed? And I didn't have the sample report for the StandOut, but it does the same thing, right? When you're, for my advisor influencer combination, a section of that assessment is how you can be perceived by others, what to be aware of when this is your strength. So things that you need to be conscious of, things you need to look out for. And also, you know, other strengths that you might conflict with, which I think is pretty interesting. I had in these assessments, we had a team who was really struggling back when I was at SAP. And we were struggling for a couple different reasons. But the main one was we really, you know, we had communication conflict. And my manager stepped back and said, wait a minute, let's take these assessments. Like, let's just find out about each other. And we did take the assessments. And it was interesting because where there was conflict, it tended to be because we were on opposite sides of the strengths, if you will. So for example, you know, I was an advisor and an influencer. Where I tended to struggle was with somebody who was maybe a teacher or a creator who doesn't really like boundaries, right? They like to think outside the box. They like to see what's out there. When you marry that with something like a hyper rational, you add that on top of it, you can see why maybe conflict arises or why there's challenges in working with between certain people on a team. The beauty of having that insight is that certainly from a leader perspective, you can understand the strengths of your team and you can understand where to tap into when you need certain things done, or if projects come down, you can have better insight into who should I assign those projects to? Who do I know can get it done quickly and will enjoy doing it because I know their strengths, right? When you have awareness around saboteurs, even amongst teams, and something that's, you know, I think saboteurs is a little bit more, I think people can be defensive about saboteurs. So I'm going to throw that out there. But I think also when you're aware of it, you can start to just help each other highlight it, right? The whole premise of the saboteur assessment is really around being able to identify it and then look at whether it's appropriate or not appropriate before it sabotages a project, before it sabotages a team, or it sabotages, you know, maybe a career move that you were going to make. So those are things that when you look at them and the better transparency that we have, not only for ourselves, but even in our team, I'm a big believer that it just helps everyone operate better and the leaders can lead more successfully because they have that insight. Now, the acquired strengths, so that was sort of the inherent strengths, right? Those are your natural tendencies. The acquired strengths, as we talked about, some of the questions that you can ask yourself and list out, right, are, you know, what skills have you developed over the years? Maybe there's certifications that you've taken on specific skills, or maybe there's training that you've taken. Maybe there's just jobs that you've had, right? What jobs have you had that have helped to develop skills? Maybe project management. Maybe you started a project management. I'm sure the way in which you project manage project number 10 is very different than project number 1, right? You've developed a routine, you've developed a methodology throughout that. Looking in the mirror and saying, hey, how did I work with others? Where, now that even if you've done the assessments, you know, how did I work with others? What were the most successful ways in which I worked with others? What are skills that I learned? You know, we've all heard teams go through this whole storming, norming, performing life cycle, right? How did you work within that? Where did you feel most comfortable? What did you learn to move the team forward? And again, another question that I always encourage people to ask is, what education have you had? And that could be anything, right? It could be a technical school. It could be university. It could be a certification, as I mentioned before. It could be an MBA. There's so much education out there that I always encourage people to say, what education do I have? And the acquired strengths just become another element of your story, right? So you have these inherent strengths. If I look at myself, I have the influencer and advisor, which I own. But then when I look at the skills that I've developed, a lot of the skills are focused on strategy. It's focused on how do you influence others without necessarily having direct authority over them. How do you execute, right? So when we looked at that other statement that I had around, look, not only am I advisor influencer, but I leverage those skills, and then I have this acquired strength to really look at strategic execution, excuse me. So that's when you start to see these acquired and inherent strengths starting to really come together. So how do you take all that now, right? So that I've thrown a lot of information at you. Certainly the assessments are key. I told you sort of how I married my own up. I love this quote about great leaders because I do think it's spot on, right? What great leaders have in common is that that each truly knows his or her strengths, and can call on the right strength at the right time. And I think that is absolutely critical to being a leader. I think that, when you lead teams, everyone is motivated differently. Everyone is coming from a different background. Everyone might have different saboteurs, as we talked about. But ultimately, there's 4 things that followers need, right? So when you're looking at what strength to pull out at the right time, Gallup did this as part of their strength assessment that we went through at the beginning. But they've identified basically 4 things that followers need. And I think that this is important, right? Because in order to know how to lead, it's important to know also how to now apply your strengths at any given time to one of these 4 categories. And, this graph is depicting this beautiful world where everything is 25%, but depending on the state of a team, as an example, hope might be higher or hope might be lower. Any of these categories can shift to different percentages. So it's really knowing, okay, hope, how much hope does my team need? What strength can I apply? What's the best approach? Maybe you tap into an acquired strength, right? Because you've dealt maybe with your company's downsizing. So people really need hope. That hope might go from 25% to 50%. Well, how do you tap into the right skill and the right leadership strength to be able to give them what they need to continue to follow you? Compassion, again, that could be something that swings either way. By knowing your strengths, by knowing sometimes how your strengths could be perceived, you might have to do a little extra, right? If I am a hyper rational, my instinct is to just keep moving forward. But I know that that's also one of my saboteurs. So I need to marry that with my strength, step back and have more empathy, right? Have more compassion for the people on my team. Trust is probably the biggest one. I think trust, once trust is broken, it's super hard to rebuild. So, when you're looking at your strengths, understanding how you can use those to build trust with your teammates is so critical. And then the last thing that followers need, according to the study, is stability, right? They want to know that somebody's in charge. They want to know that there's a plan in place. They want to know that that there's success that they can see moving forward, because ultimately that comes back to, okay, at my job, I have stability in my job, right? I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to come to work tomorrow and we're going to have a completely new mission, or we're not going to constantly be shifting things that we're going to be working on, right? And so knowing, again, going back to your strengths, knowing those, being able to provide guidance, being able to harness those, comes to also giving you a place of confidence, right? And that confidence as a leader is something that also provides that stability down the line. And so I'm going to stop a little early because I'd love to hear some questions from folks on this, if it resonates, if you've taken assessments. I'd love to hear anything that you want to put in the chat if you're up for sharing them. I will say again, I just think it's so important to not only know your strengths as a leader and when to pull them out, but I also always encourage folks, if your team's up for it, look at doing assessments together, look at sharing them. Again, if they're up for it, not everyone is comfortable doing that. But when you do have teams that embrace it, it's amazing the things that can happen. And it will also help you over time build a team leveraging your strengths, right? Because if you have strengths, you want to hire people who might have strengths in different areas than you. And that will really help to make sure that the team's diverse.
All right.
Some steps. Oh, one more
go
slide. Sorry. So a couple steps you can take today, because I love to leave people with this. So again, build self-awareness through assessments. Take the assessments if you haven't. If you've already taken assessments previously, go back and look at them. Really evaluate, right? Define your unique leadership style. Bring those inherent strengths as well as the acquired strengths together. And see what you can make in terms of your own unique leadership style, because we all have one. Assess your team. Like I said, right? Is there diversity in strengths? We often think of, and this is coming from my time in diversity inclusion, but we also often think of diversity just in terms of maybe a demographic or category. But there's also a diversity in strengths that I think gets overlooked. So if your team's open to it again, certainly look at that. And it would be interesting to see if you hired people with the same strengths or if there is truly diversity in strengths. And then the last one is patience, right? Leading with strengths takes practice. And I always encourage people to take it situation by situation. Even in coaching, we talk through it. When you identify your saboteurs, be patient with yourself. When you go through that whole assessment, it teaches you how to identify when your saboteurs are coming into play, right? When they're impacting you negatively. And it talks about things, little steps that you can take, whether it's meditation, whether it's rubbing the tips of your fingers together, things that you can take to just reassess whether the saboteur is a true saboteur or whether it's going to help you in that particular situation. So don't think that implementing all your strengths directly into your leadership will happen overnight. Just take it situation by situation and don't get frustrated by it. But I do think when you're able to embrace your strengths, all of us are better leaders and our teams are more productive. So, and I'll stop there and turn it over to you.
All right. Well, one question we have right away is, where can we find the free assessments?
Yeah, that's a great question. And here you go. So here's two of them, Positive Intelligence Saboteurs and the CliftonStrengths. Those are direct links. If you go back to, I should probably put it here, but if you go back to the slide that lists out the 3 assessments, the StandOut assessment will be in the middle. And that is hyperlinked directly to Marcus Buckingham's site. And on there, you'll see a code that you can enter for the free assessment.
All right. So when you're looking at all of this, which is very, very interesting, as a small business, should I, as I interview new people to come in, should I kind of give them one of these stress assessment tests just to see where their strengths and non-strengths lie, to make sure that they fit into my business? Because if I'm a small business, I don't have too many people, so I have to make sure whoever I do have will work out the way I want. What do you think?
I think to do it when you're a small business and only hiring a few people, I don't necessarily think that you need to do it. Honestly, I think at that point you're hiring specific, maybe even skills, right? Maybe you're looking for more of the acquired strengths. Maybe you need somebody in marketing. But as the business grows, I think I would ask probably more of my team rather than anyone that I'm interviewing. So that would be my take on that one.
Yeah, the problem is that when you're building up, you don't have much of a team.
Right.
So you but you're trying to build the team. So if
Yep.
I'm trying to build a team from the sort of the ground up, so to speak, and I've got a whole group of people I can choose from within the organization, do you think giving them one of these stress assessment tests and things like that is probably an easy way to find people who would fit in better than people who wouldn't?
I guess it would depend on how are you going to define fitting in, right? I think sometimes people tend to hire people with the same strengths. So are you going to look for people at different, ends? Like, again, I talked about sort of my top strengths, but would I necessarily look for somebody that has my bottom one? I don't really know. I think at that point, I think it's more interesting, more critical to hire people who know what they're doing and are able to execute. So I don't think necessarily an assessment at that point would be good, but I do think you're looking more in the interview process at those acquired skills, right? What have they done? What projects? How were they successful on those projects? Have they created, maybe if it's marketing, have they created social media plans and executed against them? Those sorts of things I think are more important than when you're starting and trying to find fits for your team at a smaller level.
Well, when you were at SAP or even at Microsoft, and they were telling you to either expand your operation or start a new one, how did you go about picking the people? I mean, I assume you used what you learned in all of these assessment things, but how did you do that?
So you sort of have people who you were put with. So I didn't necessarily have the luxury of choosing the people, but I will say that having gone through the assessments made me more aware of all the different strengths out there, and all the different, having gone through the saboteur one as an example, it made me aware of the different types of saboteurs. And I was able to identify those in others. I won't say it was 100% on, because again, I don't know if they ever took the assessment, but I was able to quickly identify and say, oh, for the StandOut as an example, oh, wait, I need a lot of people. Like I don't have a network. This person is a connector, right? Connectors are easy to identify. They're the person that's constantly saying, oh, you should meet my friend, Bob. Bob started this company and he just ran a social media plan, right? The connectors are constantly bringing people together. They're listening to what someone's doing and they're saying, wait, I have a friend who needs what you have. Let me connect the two of you. So just from going through this on my own, I was able to identify other people's strengths. Was it their top one? Was it validated? I don't know. But if I needed a connector and someone was there, I tapped into them. If we had new people coming on board, maybe it was interns, maybe they were more junior, I tended to tap into the person that I knew. I would call them the teacher, right? They loved to help others progress. They love to spend the time mentoring others and teaching others. So when you take it yourself, you are more easily able to identify strengths, I would say, in others and pull in what you need if you can, right? For me, I necessarily didn't have the luxury of building the team, but I pulled in people to support me outside.
Do you recommend, for example, that in a small business, maybe I take one or two of these tests every couple of years or stagger it every other year just to see if my strengths and weaknesses have changed a lot?
Yep. So in theory, right? In theory, a lot of like the CliftonStrengths 34, and then also the StandOut assessment. You can certainly take those. I wouldn't take them every year. Maybe I would take them every few years. You will find like the StandOut I just took again, and it was my number 2 flipped, right? So, but they were really close to begin with. So it's any given time how you answer a question, but you will never, this came up in a conversation I had with Krishna, you would never go, like I would never go from, for example, an advisor Sometimes people are like, well, I want to be a creator. What can I do to move to a creator? Right. That sort of goes against the premise of an assessment because it's your natural instincts. Right. So when you take that, you're taught for the StandOut and for the CliftonStrengths, your top ones might shift, but I would never expect your number one strength to all of a sudden become your number 10, or your 10 to all of a sudden becoming your number one. It's not going to shift that dramatically. Same thing for the Saboteurs Assessment. Saboteurs are based on our coping mechanisms, like how our brains formulated, but then also situational coping mechanisms that we had to develop at a young age, based on interactions. So those are things that are inherent, but we're aware of them, and we can change them if we, positivity, right? So if we're able to think positive, able to reflect before they cause a negative impact on us. The saboteurs one, I would say, could shift slightly. That might be one that you take at different chapters of your life, right? If you're starting a small business, maybe you take the Saboteurs Assessment, and then maybe in a year and a half, maybe the business is a little bit more established. Maybe you've grown the team. You're a little bit more comfortable in what you're doing. If you take it again, your saboteur could be a little bit different. Again, it's never going to shift. Like if your number 9 is never going to become your number 1, mine was a victim. It's never going to show up in my top 4. Right. But, I might be leading, as I mentioned in mine, I might be leading from a place of I might be a little bit more anxious. So maybe that saboteur could be my top one, which it is. And I think the primary reason is because, I took a new job. I'm in uncharted territory. I'm working for a new company. I'm making a brand new network, right? I'm still getting my feet under me. Very different than when I took it a year ago at a company that I was with for 17 years, knew everybody, was very comfortable in the job that I was doing. So saboteurs, I would say, could shift more frequently. Let me say that, than maybe the CliftonStrengths or the StandOut, which won't shift frequently and won't shift a lot in theory.
I'm curious to know. So this COVID thing has changed a lot of people in the way they work. And I also think in their thought process, personally and business-wise. How do you see that COVID thing affecting all the different rankings that you just talked about? Do you think it had a marked effect or not?
I don't think it had a marked effect on it. That's my opinion. I don't think it had a marked effect on the strengths one, right? The StandOut, the Clifton, for the following reason. They're just your inherent strengths. It's what you enjoy doing. It's what you're naturally good at. If anything, I would say that because of COVID, it's a great time to step back and remind yourself of what you're good at, right? Because many of us may have been able to apply those strengths frequently in our pre-COVID life, especially if I look at people who are connectors, people who are social, right? They may have traveled a lot. There was a lot of face-to-face. With COVID, they didn't get that. And I do think there's a confidence. I think COVID affected more the confidence level of people than necessarily the strength. So it's a great time from a confidence perspective to look at your strengths and remind yourself what you're good at, and how to apply it to what you're doing today and what you want in the future.
Okay, here's one. I am an equalizer and connector. My husband and I own a fabrication business with just the two of us right now. How could I best use these strengths in a two-person business, hoping to grow, I guess, the business one day?
Yeah. So I would be curious if that person asked if their husband had also taken this assessment.
Okay, that I don't know.
Yeah,
is a
so I'd be
good
curious to
one.
see if the husband had taken the assessment. I don't know enough about the different combinations, honestly, but I would go back to reading, when you get the standout assessment, it has your I'll call it a superpower, but basically a summary of those two. So for me, people move quickly under my guidance. I would be curious to see what that strength statement is. And then how that compares with maybe her husband as well, because I think there's probably a combination that they can leverage to continue to progress that business forward. They may also find that there's something missing that they need. Again, going back to being able to easily identify other strengths that people might have, i.e. the connector. If you're bringing people on board quickly or trying to expand rapidly, bringing in a teacher, being able to find somebody that enjoys mentoring, developing others. That's sort of what I would do, but I'd be curious sort of what her husband was and how those two strengths marry together. No pun intended.
Right. We don't have an answer, so we'll go
Okay.
with what you said. All right, we're right here at our appointed time. So I'm going to ask our chapter chair, Linda, to come on in case she has something to ask, and if not, to end the program. Thank you
Okay,
again. Nicole.
thank you. We did have a positive comment. It's not a question, but a comment. One of our participants said she took the CliftonStrengths before, got communication, connectedness, woo, positivity, and input. It was nice to learn what I'm good at instead of a lot of other tests I'd taken that focus on my weaknesses. So that was just a comment about that. So if you want to feel good, take that test.
Yeah. So true. Well, I think oftentimes, right, women especially, we all are, but women especially are very hard on ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
And we tend to focus on what we're not good at, what we're, where we're falling short. I often hear people say, I'm mediocre wife, I'm a mediocre worker, I'm a mediocre. And they're just focused, and that just means they're focusing on what they're not doing. So being able to just take that time to focus on actually what you are doing, right? What you're great at, shifts that mindset to being a little bit more positive. Agree.
Absolutely. This is what we try to focus on when we mentor people through SCORE. We're connectors. I know that because we connect them to resources, to many things that can help them, but also encouragement. That's what we're trying to do because, we do tend to, as women and some men as well, knock ourselves down when we're not seeing the immediate results. So, the encouragement you get from a SCORE mentor, I think, as Nicole will attest to through her mentoring journey, is a wonderful thing. And I've had some clients say, well, I've given it a year and I just can't do it anymore. I don't see it. And I say, a year's not very long. A year is not very long to get your business going. So we do try to build them up, but these things are wonderful. These tests, just to see who you are and how you should proceed with your business. So Nicole, once again, thank you for a wonderful presentation. As we mentioned on the previous slide, the presentation she did on June 7th is still available on our YouTube channel. I think there's a link there. Of course, everyone will get a copy of the slides and the recording. And one of Nicole's mentor, who's Krishna Akella, is putting his information out here. If you have any questions after today and you want to ask Nicole, please send it to Krishna and they'll both be happy to help you. So I thank you all once again for joining us. I hope you got a lot out of this. Nicole, it was a great presentation. Thanks again for all of the time you spent doing this. I know it's not it's not an easy effort to put these things together. So we do appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And we hope to see everyone again next Tuesday. What's the topic next weekend?
Let's see.
I thought you had it on the top of your head.
I have it right here at the bottom of my foot.
Okay.
Actually, we don't have anything next week, but we do on the 12th because next week is the 4th of July. And all
Oh,
that.
right. Okay.
So
So,
we actually have one that people have been asking about, which is basic accounting options, QuickBooks by an accountant who we've recommended, Kevin Fisher. So I think
Okay.
that'll be very interesting.
yeah, we get a lot of questions about QuickBooks.
Mhm.
We don't
Yes,
teach
exactly.
the course, but we do
No.
have people who know it pretty well. So that will be another interesting one.
Oh, yeah.
So once again, thank you all. If you need help, you know where to find us, buckscounty.score.org, and we'll take care of you. Thanks again. See you
Thank you.
in a couple weeks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.